Hey everyone, so I wanted to go through um, a video of a writing process, and ironically, this particular story is not easy to write. I can explain a little bit more as we go in, but I mean, what you're seeing here is real time as I am drafting, sped up quite a bit, so the real time for each of these chunks is listed there on the screen. And the only thing that's cut out of this is when I was referencing my Kindle notes and the areas that I highlighted in Lisa Feldman Barrett's How Emotions Are Made book. And what actually ended up happening is I've had a thought for a long time that I wanted to write something about this concept of constructed emotions. But it's been about a year since I read that book, and I realized I completely forgot most of what was in there in the detail. And in some cases, that's not a big deal, but in this one it was because the concepts of emotional construction and how it works in the brain were pretty complicated. So, about right through this first half of the draft, I actually went and had to read back through most of the book in order to get a better understanding, which ended up not being necessary at all because, as you can see later in my revision, I actually pull out most of the hard sciencey stuff. One, because I wasn't explaining it well, and two, because it wasn't really that interesting after I thought about it a little more. I'll be putting a Google document that has revision and track changes on, so you can see how I actually go about revising and editing my work. But with this one, you can just kind of see the flow of things, and I think the most important thing to highlight here is that while I am writing, I'm really trying to resist clicking on the mistakes. Like there, I just did one, you can see it. I tried really hard to resist that because when I start working on revision or wording or something similar to that, it really breaks up the flow of the work. So as a former English instructor, I strongly believe in the writing process of ideation and then drafting and then revising and then editing. And a really good rule of thumb for that, for everyone, if you don't already know, is you should not waste any time editing before you have revised, because you may be editing something that ends up getting deleted if you go and revise it later. And so then you've actually wasted time editing something that you're not going to use. So you always want to save editing for the very last thing. I am not always successful in resisting those purple and red and blue underlines, especially with Grammarly. So that's something that I've been working on. One of the things that, as I was drafting this, that became very apparent is that my writing style, it was so awkward. It was hard to start the article, the story. It was hard to find the right way of explaining things. It was hard to integrate the pieces that I wanted to from the source text. And it just wasn't, this is not an example of a story that I have written that really flows. And so I had to force myself through it. And then some of that also may have been some stress knowing that I was recording it. So it was this weird self-fulfilling prophecy of wow, I'm struggling a lot here on this thing that I'm using to demonstrate writing process. But I think that it's actually better that I struggled than just went through and typed everything, because you can see a little bit better here how the thought process grows and progresses throughout the piece. So that was the end of draft one. It was 44 minutes. A lot, like I said, the only thing I cut out was all of the times where I transferred over to my Kindle screen and was reading through all of my highlights. And so I cut all that out. There was a lot of dead space of just sitting there reading. So that was a 44-minute session. And then this is the next day I have come back. And in between the first day and this day, I made some decisions about what needed to be done and what needed to be in here. And so you can see there's quite a bit of stuff that is getting added. There's some stuff that's getting removed. There are some things that are being fixed for errors. And there is some stuff, I think, that's coming up here at the end of this chunk where I start removing things. And the biggest thing with this particular piece was the reason why, and so this was a super awkward line, I'll just stop. So I went on this thing, and then I was trying to explain that language is acquired as our concepts, and if you raise a child, you could actually teach them the wrong words for the same concepts, and then it would mess them up. And anyway, this was a waste of time typing this out, but and I ended up removing it again later. So it's just as a really good example of how awkward this was to write. And the reason why it was plain and simple. This wasn't a human perspective. This was me trying to summarize a 300-page book on neuroscience about emotions. It's very scientific. The author actually does a pretty good job with a difficult topic. I have read better books on hard science topics. Daniel Kahneman in Thinking Fast and Slow does a much better job of explaining these sort of neuroscience principles. But all that to say, it was a good book. I enjoyed reading it. The issue is that what I was trying to do was just, it was not working. It wasn't, there wasn't a good flow. There wasn't a lot of myself as an author, as a writer, and the tone of my writing in it because it was so stiff. And so what you're starting to see throughout this, and you'll see it more in the track changes Google document, is I started to just remove this these very stiff pieces. And I started to add in the personal stories, the personal things. See, there it went. I just was like, okay, that whole quotation, not necessary. Making the headers more friendly. This is really at the point in time where I was like, all right, this story is it just sucks, and I need to make it better. And how do I do that? And it's like always with medium writing and stories, the way to make it better is to make it personal. And so trying to bring in those personal examples and stories is the main focus of the revision. So at this point in the writing process, I'm really just trying to fine-tune the basic pieces and the examples that are there. I'm trying to make sure that each of the quotes that are from the original source text have good introductions and good exits out of them. You can't just plop down citations or quotes from other places without kind of framing them up and explaining what their value is to the story. So in this example, I had too many, and then I ended up getting rid of all of them, I think, except one. I can't remember, maybe two. And the other thing what happened with this one is because I needed to go back through later and add in all of the people part of it, this version of the story feels and looks very different from the published version because really did reframe it from a more human perspective of adding in more examples and lessening some of the scientific details. And I mean, I'm not promising or bragging or saying that the end story is any good, but the end story that's published out there is way better than this one. So as I mentioned before, I'll be putting this video into a story about writing process and writing. And then I'll also link to a Google document that has other revisions that I made, so you can check that out as well.